All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the January Clinical Trials Community of Practice meeting. We are very fortunate today to have two excellent guests joining us. Our presenters are Terri Edwards and Dixie Thompson, our clinical research colleagues from the Trial Innovation Centers and Recruitment Innovation Center, part of the NCATS Trial Innovation Network. So I'm going to turn things over to Terri and Dixie, and they are going to walk us through their wonderful presentation.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Christy. We're so excited to be here. Oh, we tested this and now there. All right. If you can see my slide, I'm not going to bore you with all the details other than to say that I'm an old registered nurse from a NICU in the 1980s that then quickly became involved in clinical research. And my research career spans the last 3 decades. I've got expertise in clinical trials operations, site performance, research staffing, research venues at the University of Utah. I am a director of research and science there, and I wear a few different hats, one of which is being the operations lead for this Trial Innovation Network Liaison Teams Committee and Working Group. And that's what brings me here today. I think probably many of you also wear a variety of hats, so I won't beleaguer that any longer. And my dear colleague, Terri Edwards from Vanderbilt, is a recognized expert really across the country. And before the Trial Innovation Network, people knew Terri could answer questions, and she's always so gracious to be here. I'm grateful that we're here together. This is a fun opportunity for us. We often are asked to reach out and talk to investigators or liaison teams at a variety of institutions, and I really consider it a privilege and hope today will be beneficial to all of you, regardless of your role. Whether you're at the large academic center at University of Wisconsin-Madison, or whether you're in the community at one of the clinics or partner institutions, I think there will be something interesting here for you, I hope. And if nothing else, we've made the connection and you can reach out to us with any questions you may have about clinical trials and specifically multi-center clinical trials. Terri, would you want to add anything to that before we start?
Just to say, I'm like Dixie, I'm old. I've been around for a long time, been at Vanderbilt for over 35 years. And like Dixie, wear a lot of different hats. I'm an operational lead for our Recruitment Innovation Center, operational lead for our Vanderbilt portion of our Duke Vanderbilt Trial Innovation Center. I'm the POC at Vanderbilt, so I feel I get that experience and really am passionate about trying to streamline research processes, both locally, because we struggle at Vanderbilt with tons of administrative barriers, but nationally as well. So this is working with the 10 and with you guys is such a great opportunity to learn about what kind of things make a successful research environment. So take it away, Dixie.
Thank you. That's perfect. Today's objectives, we're going to outline for you the structure of the CTSA program and the Trial Innovation Network. We hope you'll be able to learn about the resources and a few of the use cases of the Trial Innovation Centers and Recruitment Innovation Center. And we're going to review the important processes and people for beginning a partnership on a multi-center trial or study from your site, and then hopefully have plenty of time for Q&A. We would love to hear what your questions are and what your own activities are. So I will start at the top. So the NIH, National Institutes of Health, has 27 institutes and centers, and depending on your own field of work, you're probably more familiar with certain institutes and centers over others. For example, I think almost everyone knows NCI, the National Cancer Institute. Many know NHLBI, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. But NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Science, is the funding institute for the CTSA program and for the Trial Innovation Network. So that's where we get our funding to do this important work. I think their kind of Goals are here stated quite articulately on this NCAT slide, but I think a key tenet, that last sentence of translational science, is to understand commonalities. What are the common causes? What are the common solutions? And that certainly is driving our work at the Trial Innovation Network. The CTSA program is funded through NCATs. To give you a little bit of perspective, the NIH, I think the fiscal year 22 president's budget for the NIH is about 52 billion with a B, and that NCATS is not the largest institute and center, but is funded at about 879.880 million with an M. If that gives you some context there on where that federally funded money is going. But within NCATS, the lion's share of that money goes to the CTSA program, about 600 million of that 880, what have you. That CTSA program is often viewed as the flagship program of the NIH, and that isn't because of anything maybe other than the breadth of the CTSA program. There are CTSA awards at 60 large academic centers across the country, and those CTSA programs have a unique reach and role into their communities and beyond their own communities through affiliate partnerships. And that's what makes that national network of the CTSA program such a strength at the NIH. I won't read you this very wordy slide, but you will get a copy of these slides and can go through and see what kind of the work there is in driving treatments to patients more quickly. The local CTSAs, this slide isn't current, so don't read into it if the Wisconsin bullet isn't on there. I should have checked that first. But this is kind of a representation of where many of those CTSAs are. The local hub liaison teams actually are a key partner to the Trial Innovation Network. Each liaison team has a medical director and then has a variety of members as decided locally, a variety of members who have multidisciplinary expertise in clinical trial operations, contracting, IRB, study design, recruitment, informatics, statistics, et cetera. And those hub liaison teams are really responsible for driving the connections and the engagement across the CTSA consortium and through the Trial Innovation Network activities at the local level. That 10 liaison team point of contact, in Wisconsin's case, it's Christy. That key person is responsible for kind of a bi-directional role to not only put forward projects from your own community to be evaluated and maybe performed at the Trial Innovation Network, but also to serve as a connection to some of the network or CTSA or even national trials as they are looking for sites. That has never been more important than during COVID, when the NIH funded ACTIVE, before COVID, when the NIH funded HEAL initiatives, helping end addiction long-term. Those studies really needed to be able to roll out quickly across the country, and the CTSAs were able to support that important work. And the Trial Innovation Network then, also funded through NCATS, is made up of those 60 hub liaison teams from across the country. It's made up of 3 trial innovation centers, one at the University of Utah, one is shared at Vanderbilt and Duke, and one is shared at Johns Hopkins and Tufts, and then a single recruitment innovation center that's housed at Vanderbilt. As you heard Terri talk, she's actually in a key leadership role at both the Duke Vanderbilt TIC and the Vanderbilt RIC, which is why she's so great. This one slide is kind of a single visual of what I just described to you. And I want to point out again, Wisconsin and their partners are here in the CTSA hubs. Each individual CTSA is key within the network and really stands on their own unique strengths in science and medicine, and yet also contributes to the overall work of the CTSA program and the Trial Innovation Network. So clinical trial problems and processes. Let's talk about those a little bit. So what are the national barriers to clinical trial operational excellence? If you have ever led a clinical trial, either locally for a single trial or in a broader way for a multi-centered trial, you'll recognize these barriers, right? NIH funds many trials, but many fail to recruit. The infrastructure in the US is relatively poor and is complex to navigate. Industry will pay for time and efficiency that doesn't always exist here. May exist at your site and not at mine, may exist in another country and not in the US. Our regulations are complex. There's a potential shortage of qualified, willing, and able investigators who have the time and the willingness to serve as a PI. There's also a huge difference between single site trials and multi-site investigations, and especially with the logistics of management. And then lack of organization is common across the country. And I don't mean to say that to make anyone feel bad. It's just a common thing because of the complexities, because every trial has its nuances. There is a certain lack of organization that is recognized everywhere. And then what are the local barriers? They're the same barriers, right? Infrastructure in Utah, Wisconsin, Tennessee is relatively poor and complex. Lack of organizations common locally. And then there's the additional barriers of clinical versus research time. How much time is a provider really given to do good quality research? Lack of support staff and lack of adequate funding. Are there collaborative solutions to these problems? We certainly hope so. The Trial Innovation Network's mission is to leverage the talent and expertise and resources across the CTSA consortium and to act as a national laboratory to understand and improve multi-site trials and to inform healthcare by supporting successful multi-site trials that answer important clinical questions. Solutions of the Trial Innovation Network now are really focused in three distinct areas: study design expertise, specifically multi-center study design expertise, site identification, the ability to reach out and connect with experts across the country. We've talked early in the network that there's that known problem that people work with people they already know, or they work with their peers that they recognize from national meetings. We needed to open that up so that experts could find one another in a more efficient way. And then finally, in trial performance and conduct of multi-center clinical research trials and studies. I will say, if I can maybe let me back up to this slide, the TIN offers all investigators the opportunity to request an initial consultation for multi-center studies or trials. And those resources and consultations are designed to help an investigator develop a proposal into a protocol and to enhance your study operations or improve recruitment and retention for the eventual trials. Some proposals may be implemented across the entire CTSA consortium, while others may be performed in just a few sites or a regional consortia, if you will. With a proposal submission, every investigator will get an initial consultation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Others will go on from that initial consultation to receive distinct resources, perhaps single IRB assistance, perhaps site identification and investigator identification, and others actually will go on to do an entire comprehensive consultation prior to a grant submission and coordination and implementation of that eventually funded trial. So there is a variety of resources that can happen through a Trial Innovation Network partnership. Not everything has to mean an entire rollout data coordinating center support for a trial. These are a few use cases that kind of describe that very thing. So just going from left to right, there was a neurology initial consultation, phase 2B, hoping to get funded through NINDS. The TIC and the RIC supported with study planning support. And at one point, the PI just paused the consultation and realized they didn't have time to pursue this. We share that specific use case because that's not a negative. For an investigator to learn early on where they really have bandwidth and not is an important piece of the pipeline of clinical trials in our country. We hate to see anyone waste effort unnecessarily. Provision of resources, the next column, that was a CV disease study, a large one that both the TIC and the RIC supported with an EHR-based cohort assessment and with site selection. That one was funded in 2018 and went on to recruit additional CTSAs through that work of interrogating the EHRs across the country and identifying willing and qualified investigators. That was simple. And then the study just goes on and does its work without the TICs and the RIC. Then there's the comprehensive consult that I briefly mentioned. And that's when someone gets really detailed planning and support pre-award. Some of our trials have been, 2 years of comprehensive consultation before a grant submission and funding. It's not the sort of thing that you do in a rapid, ineffective way. It's a comprehensive consult that's intended to really provide the best resources for an investigator. And then the final column is full trial implementation is an example of that, where the TIC and the RIC provided recruitment and retention plan and study planning. And that study went on to be funded in 2019 and is now being implemented through the TIN with one of our TICs functioning as data coordinating center. At that point, when I mentioned the TIC and RIC consultations, I'm always asked, tell me more about the Recruitment Innovation Center. So with that, I will turn it to my colleague, Terri, to talk to us about the RIC.
Thanks, Dixie. And I think Dixie gets that question because people are familiar with trial innovation centers looking like coordinating centers. So they sort of are aware of what a CCC does and a DCC does, but the RIC is the first of its kind. And so we're very fortunate to be able to sort of break some ground here in some of these efforts. Our RIC is led by Paul Harris, who is our contact PI, and as many of you know, is a huge informatics guru and has created RedCap and many other platforms. And Consuelo Wilkins, who is a national expert in community engagement. And so we're very fortunate to have both of them leading our Recruitment Innovation Center that is really focused on, at the core, improving participant enrollment and retention in multi-center clinical trials. And we knew from the get-go there was going to have to be a multi-pronged approach. And so having the experiences of both Paul and Consuelo to lead things in the informatics realm and the community engagement realm seemed like a perfect marriage. And so we've been fortunate to build on those. Next slide, Dixie. Some of to dig into the recruitment and retention strategy. So when a project comes through the TIN pipeline, the RIC will get assigned. And one of the things that we like to do is just to dig in with the study team and give advice and recommendations on what could be optimized in a project regarding recruitment and retention. And for the most part, we have 4 big buckets that we align our resources in: recruitment and retention planning, because it's always good to get some planning done on the front end; IT help through the cohort assessment; community engagement, as I've mentioned; and recruitment material optimization. As of September, we had 107 studies that we had provided recruitment resources for. We currently have 37 studies that we're continuing to provide resources with. So next slide. As I mentioned, the 4 main service lines, there are tools and resources that align with each of those broad titles. So with the recruitment and retention planning, we've got a group that will work with the study team looking at their feasibility and doing an assessment, looking at their risks and risk mitigation as they are just thinking about developing their study. We also have a team that works with them regarding engagement and retention. so that they can look at specific strategies that might help them as they're doing outreach and then retaining their participants. We have a thing called research design studios that really help with optimizing their hypothesis and then their eligibility. We also have a tool called MyCap, which is a divergence from REDCap in that it allows study teams to build their data set in REDCap, then move it over into a mobile app that participants can enter their information in, and a local mobile app that transfers then into the data system. And we have Research Match. And Research Match is a national platform that allows, similar to Match.com, in that it allows volunteers and participants to register themselves, demographic information, diseases, medications, interests, and then allow research teams to go in and identify eligibility criteria for their study to then match with those participants. And Research Match works as an honest gatekeeper to allow participants to decide whether they want to be contacted for a particular study that a researcher might want to recruit in, and then we open that up. And so I know University of Wisconsin actually does have an agreement with the Research Map platform. So if Christy, if you and your team ever decide to try to get more engaged in that, we're happy to help make those connections, because it's a great resource. It's got 160,000 participants in it already. So also we have the cohort assessment. We talked about Paul Harris being such an IT guru, and we have partners at Columbia, Reagan Street, Indiana University that all help us with clinical system decision support, as well as optimizing cohort discovery. So we've got great opportunities there. As I mentioned, Consuelo Wilkins has tremendous experience with community engagement. She helps us with our community engagement studios, which are sessions that a researcher can request, and we find 8 to 10 participants. Now we do them all virtually, so they're actually even more productive. So we get 8 to 10 participants where a researcher can ask specific questions about his study design or his materials, and have a facilitator that then helps with the dialogue and keeps it moving. And we have a lot of really good success with those studios. In addition, we have our community advisory board, and this group contains 12 members of individuals across the country that represent different populations, and they give us tremendous input on messaging that researchers might have, populations of interest, and other ways that can help optimize the study team's experience. And then our recruitment materials is probably our most robust resource line, because we are constantly reviewing materials, whether it be brochures and one-pagers, social media campaigns, websites, creating digital recruitment tools, are things that all come from our recruitment materials team, and they stay very busy. Next slide, please. So I want to just give an example of a use case that we've done with the RIC, and I wanted to use the target study because it's near and dear to my heart. I actually was involved in this one, and it was one of our early ones. So it was a great learning opportunity for both us and the target team. Next slide. The target study was interesting in that, as I mentioned, it was one of our early ones. It was submitted in 2018, and actually the NIAMS program officer is the one that submitted it. So the target study is actually being run by Dan Solomon from Harvard and Joan Botham from Columbia, really strong researchers, strong study teams, lots of experience. But this was just a tough study, very complicated, very complex eligibility. And so the program officer, really wanted to be able to see if there were opportunities to try and help this study gain more ground. Because when it came to us in 2014, it's a rheumatoid arthritis, by the way. Let me give you a little background on target. Rheumatoid arthritis study, looking at some different already approved drugs in vascular inflammation. And their goal was to consent 400 patients with the intent of having 200 to be randomized with 40 sites. And they were funded in 2015 for 5 years. So when they came to us in 2018, they had identified about 25 sites and they had 23 participants enrolled. So doing the math, you can tell there was not a lot of time left and they had a lot of work to get done. So we were excited to be able to jump in on this with the study team. Next slide, please. So we met with the study team and we found several different opportunities that we could perhaps optimize some of their resources. One of them was the study needed a lot of referrals from their clinical sites. So we thought, well, is there a way we can help optimize that? Their eligibility was challenging for participants to understand. They actually had several participants that's, consented, but then when they found out what was all involved with the study, they then withdrew. So we figured, how can we, bridge that gap so that participants are informed more clearly on the front end and save everyone's time? This particular disease area has a ton of studies. Rheumatoid arthritis studies are very popular, and a lot of the sites that the study team was looking at already had a lot of studies involving rheumatoid arthritis. So we wanted to help give a tool to the study team to figure out how they might refine their site selection so they get the best bang for their buck. And we, of course, noticed there was a short time remaining. They had a little over 2 years left to recruit these patients. So we had several meetings with the study team and found several different ways to actually partner with them to grow some things. One of them is we completely revamped their brochure and their messaging so that it was much more clear and clean, and was much more appealing to participants. And this ended up being one of the deliverables that the study team was most proud of. They thought that was the best brochure they'd ever seen. So we're hopeful that they'll use the techniques for that for other studies. We were able to develop a clinician app. Now, clinician app is, we call it a CSA at the RIC, Clinician Study App, and it's essentially the laminated pocket cards that we all see in the units that is now in digital form. So you're able to click on it, this web page that is able to be saved like a app on your mobile device. And you can see your study description, you'll see your eligibility, your schedule of events, and most important, you can have a direct link to the site-specific contact information where you can email them or give them a call, letting them know that you have a potential participant that they could come in and talk to. So we were able to get that for the study team, which was fairly effective. Again, that was in our building the bridge for clinician referral opportunities. We did create a convening trials tool for the study where we looked at all the studies that were at the proposed sites to see what kind of competition was going on with the clinical area and the research studies in that area, to try to give them a little bit more information in refining their site selection. And then we also did a social media campaign. This study, we did several markets. Because of its complexity, they got a lot of traction, but they didn't get a lot of conversion. So we learned that there are some studies that social media is really not going to be the best avenue for recruitment. Based on all those tools and resources, the study was able to, they implemented all the recommendations as best they could. They were able to reevaluate their enrollment goals to indicate they could answer the question with an enrollment of 160 participants rather than 200. And they were able to achieve that in just over 24 months. So they were very pleased with what they were able to do. We were pleased with what we were able to learn as the RIC. And so we're able to then build on those with other cases that come through the pipeline. So that's it for those. Dixie, I'll turn it over to you for the next one.
Great, thank you, Terri. I love to be reminded of that specific study. We learned a lot on that, and the RIC does such important work. Because Terri mentioned the PIs of the Recruitment Innovation Center there at Vanderbilt, I thought it merits mentioning the PI of the Utah Trial Innovation Center is Dr. Mike Dean. The co-PIs of the Duke Vanderbilt TIC are Drs. Danny Benjamin and Drs. Gordon Bernard, and then the joint PIs of the JHU Tufts TIC are Drs. Dan Hanley, Dan Ford, and Dr. Harry Selker. I like to just call out their names because they are recognized experts across the country, and they are very hands-on in this work in the way that Terri described. Dr. Harris and Dr. Wilkins are at the RIC. It's a fantastic expert leadership team there, and with our director, Jane Atkinson at NCATS also. Okay, with that, how do you go about engaging the TIN? What next and why? So when you engage with the TIN, it is a partnership, and our intent is to help streamline the multi-center study processes, to leverage national support along with local support, to reduce the time required to develop a quality multi-center study. We connect investigators with relevant experts. Sometimes that's really critical to the success of a project when it is a rare disease or a difficult population to recruit. We do work in partnership with other NIH institutes and centers. They seem to be some of the most excited stakeholders for the Trial Innovation Network, because our network is a disease agnostic network. And that means we're not just supporting cancer trials, we're not just supporting cardiovascular trials, that it really is a network that can support any clinical question or idea for a multi-center trial. It may provide a competitive funding advantage and begins locally with your own Wisconsin team. So let's talk about that. So a reminder, liaison teams are the front line and the front door of the Trial Innovation Network, and each CTSA program hub has their own network liaison team. There are more than 300 hub liaison team members across the country, and they regularly join meetings and calls every month. It's a very active, collaborative network in that way. The liaison teams connect the hub to the TICs and the RIC, and they encourage investigators to submit to the TIN their own ideas for multi-center trials, and they also facilitate implementation of TIN trials at their own hub. Here I've added the names of your CTSA PI, Dr. Brazier. Dr. Safdar is on this call. As we know, she said hello at the beginning. She's the medical director for that hub liaison team. And then of course, Christy is the point of contact. Hers is the name and email that you should really be familiar with as you move forward with a multi-center project. And this was a slide she sent over with just a few extra names of some of the people on their team. You can see they've got IRB expertise, contracting expertise, and a liaison team member who's specifically focused on RIC engagement. Christy, would you want to add anything about that slide?
I think it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, obviously we interface with a lot of different entities as well, but just in regards to IRB and contracts and then RIC as well. Yeah, I think this summarizes it fairly well.
Great, thank you. I think one thing that I've learned in all the wonderful opportunities I have to talk to people across the country is that within those liaison teams, there's someone who knows what you need to know or knows the person to connect you with. Our CTSA PIs were very intentional when they built their own local teams. The Utah team looks different than this. Our Utah team has a little more leadership decision makers than some people's teams, like more faculty effort we put on our team. Many teams look like this. Similar to Wisconsin's, and then some teams are kind of purely operational project management kind of people who can really help get a study off the ground. So it is fun to see, but it's important to know that that whole team is available to support your projects. And so then what happens if you connect with the Wisconsin liaison team and you want to put forward a trial idea into the Trial Innovation Network? Again, I've added Wisconsin and partners up in the top left. That's really where you'll start. You'll start locally with your liaison team here. And from there, if local resources will be used to assess your project, and it really is the CTSA PI's decision whether you move forward with the Trial Innovation Network or not. Once that decision's made, then you can submit a study proposal. I think it's a simple enough application process, but we're happy to walk you through it. It's not a grant application. It's a simple online form for you to complete. Once that form's been submitted, you will hear back from a representative from one of the TICs and a representative from the RIC within 5 days. And that initial phone call will kind of help set priorities for your consultation. They'll have an initial consultation as soon as they can schedule it with your calendars and theirs, and they'll conduct that. And out of that initial consultation, it will be determined to either work with you on resource requests or move it forward for a complete comprehensive consultation and possible implementation in the network. We have covered a lot of information here today, and I'm certain some of it at least has been confusing. So Terri and I would like to answer your questions, would like to hear what interests you and what the clinical trials activity is in your community of practice. I was excited to hear about the community of practice there in Wisconsin, because I've just been added to a community of practice for project managers. And so it's kind of on the top of my mind here too. But do people have questions for us?
And I will say there were a few questions that came through in the chat to me, so I can share those in a minute, but maybe we'll just open it up to anyone who would like to share any thoughts or questions that they have.
Stop sharing so I can see people.
I can also kick it off with one, and maybe that'll get the ball rolling. So I'll just read this. Many at UW-ICTR are looking at how representation in recruitment matches or mirrors community demographics. And this person was interested in any RIC efforts or guidance or advertisement on supporting or tracking the reflection of meeting diversity or representation goals in recruitment. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is something that I think is not uncommon among all the institutions. We don't currently have a mechanism that we have standardized for the tracking, but we do have different ways of optimizing some of the outreach to the different underrepresented populations. And we have several mechanisms for study teams for training. We have a Faster Together course, which is on Coursera. That's nice. We also have some tools that are being developed. We have a underrepresented or a minority working group that is developing tools that will go in the toolkit that will be available to all the study teams on our Trial Innovation Network website. So it's definitely something that we hold near and dear and are anxious to try to get more resources developed to you guys as study teams.
Terri, I might add, because that is something that's on every funder's mind, it's on every CTS API's mind, right? How do we meet that expectation? But I think, Terri, in the research studios, that sometimes even comes up early in the planning stage of a trial. How are we going to do that? Let's take those good recommendations for recruitment, and then how do we as an investigator or a study team like track how effective it is? So.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I'll go ahead and read the next question. How available are these resources to UW researchers and administrators? Who pays for them? Does it come out of grant funding, or is it institutional departmental funding? So maybe you can speak generally about that.
Terri, you want to go first, or you want me to go first and you clean up?
Why don't you go first? Because I know we actually have some guidance on our website. So I'll let you go first, and then.
We do have guidance, and we can send that wording over to Christy, but the Trial Innovation Network is funded by NCATS, and an initial consult's not going to cost an investigator anything. The value of that first question, the value is in really how far an investigator takes that partnership, right? We've learned that some institutions have submitted several proposals, and they've gotten so much out of it. They keep finding proposals to put in, where other institutions are kind of like, oh, we don't know if this fits yet. I think there is a point in the consultation process where if there are resources or services that are going to cost you, that will be very clear, and then that's written into your budget. One of the questions people come to the Trial Innovation Network is to ask for help with budgeting for a multi-center trial. If the study goes on to full implementation, for example, then you would need to write data coordinating center costs into your grant. Those aren't free. That's an expensive service, but it's something that the funders expect to pay, right? That's not a surprising cost to see on anybody's multi-center budget. Single IRB, I think people in Wisconsin have a really good understanding of single IRB. There's experts there. And for many years, the cost for any IRB was included in indirects, but now this new work of managing multiple sites in single IRB, that takes real effort. So when a study needs a single IRB, the IRBs will give them a quote for that cost. Partnering with the Trial Innovation Network, though, you will get single IRB navigation, usually from a TIC, that it comes at no cost and really is a benefit. It's project management support to get through that single IRB work. Terri, what else might you add?
Yeah, just building on Dixie's remark about the complexity. So during the initial consultation and many of our recommendations and the majority of our resources are able to be provided without a cost. However, if you're looking for complex clinical decision support, we would work with you on figuring out how some effort of one of our informatics experts might need to be included on that. Community engagement studios, just depending on the population, there might be a charge associated with that. And sometimes there's not. Again, it just depends on complexity associated with the resource in particular. But we work with the study teams early up front to try to identify if there is any cost, how much that would be and how to bear that. So.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you. Next question, Matthew Herrera. Does the TIN support pediatric or specifically neonatal studies?
Absolutely. So actually, two of our PIs, Dr. Mike Dean in Utah and Dr. Danny Benjamin at Duke, are pediatric researchers and critical care physicians first. And so I can speak for Utah in that our TIC was built on a very successful data coordinating center that already was coordinating 13 different networks, many of which are pediatric critical care networks. I think it's important to know that that is a different group. I'm a former NICU nurse, so I love the question. I think one piece is that children's hospitals aren't always directly connected to a CTSA organization, and that doesn't matter. We can support those trials as well. We have reach out to many of the children's hospitals in the country. Only a couple of them have their own standalone CTSA, but many are affiliated. Excellent question.
Let's see, we've got another question from Ann Buffington. Is the intention always that consult occurs before a trial begins while it is in grant application preparation stage, or may investigators submit a consultation request at any stage in the study?
Do you want to take this one, Terri?
Sure. So actually, I think the majority of our requests actually do come, especially for the RIC, come from studies that have already started and are finding they've got challenges much of the time with the recruitment and retention aspect. But sometimes it's, they are finding other things where they're trying to get a budget to fit that was perhaps smaller than what they had originally applied for. And we've got some experts that can give guidance on how to make some of those things work. And yes, helping people that are in the midst of a study and finding challenges is something we are completely open to and happy to assist with.
Oh, I want to add, can I add, Terri?
Oh, yeah.
I think we all know the example of a beautiful grant that goes in and gets what Dr. Dean refers to as a 17% haircut, right? And then you don't have the money that you expected, and you're relying on institutional funds. We have, we should put this into our use cases, but there's at least one example in the last year of a study in that really dangerous predicament of putting the quality of the trial at risk by being unfunded or not funded to a sufficient level. And they brought it to the TICs, and the experts at the TICs provided kind of advantages in study design that they were able to then accomplish the goal with the allotted budget. Nobody wants to turn back an award. No investigator, even if it makes the most sense, wants to turn back an NIH award. And so finding a way to make that work is really important. I will also say we love to get projects at least 180 days before the grants due, so that nothing's on fire. It's like, let's think about this in a collaborative way. We really do like that. We don't love, oh, this is going in next month, can you please help? I think the people that work at the TICs and the RIC try their best, but yeah, give us some early lead time and you get more for your efforts.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that covers all of the recent questions in chat, unless I missed something, or if folks have thought of other things they wanted to ask our presenters. Go ahead and unmute if you like.
Hey, while they're thinking, I recognize that not everyone on this call is at a large academic medical center. And so I want to make sure they know that they're part of this community. The CTSAs actually have defined partnerships or affiliates that work with the CTSAs. So that's kind of, if here's the CTSA and here's the partners and affiliates, and then they all also have their friends, right? And anywhere in there is you're able to kind of tap into this resource. The Trial Innovation Network, in order to accomplish our own aims, we need studies to be able to work on, right? We don't just want to try to make things up or only serve our own studies. So we're happy to hear from investigators who are willing to partner. That's the key word, that it is a partnership. It's a collaboration. And so whether it costs money or doesn't, there's great value in that partnership. I know more than one consultation that came for an initial consultation and actually got everything they needed just right in that initial consultation. So it doesn't need to be a long-term marriage, but I think there's a variety of resources available.
Thank you for pointing that out, Dixie. I think that's very helpful to some of our attendees. All right, well, last call for questions or comments. I think as Dixie mentioned, of course, I'll be sharing these great slides afterward, along with the link to the recording for the session, in case there are folks that want to revisit or weren't able to attend. But I guess just in closing, thank you so much, Dixie and Terri. We really appreciate you joining today and educating us further about the resources and excellent offerings of the TIN.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks, everyone. Stay warm.
Bye.
Thanks for joining, everyone. Take care.